This week in our Master Gardener class, we learned about plant diseases. And as you can imagine, that's a pretty extensive topic. So you're going to get a very top-level overview about what was discussed so that if you decide to go to a Master Gardener class, you can understand just what you're going to be learning about. One thing that I enjoyed about the approach of this class was that we learned about the connections between a particular plant, the causes, and the environment, and how those things come together to cause or allow a particular disease to affect a plant. Throughout this, one thing that I enjoyed that was stressed was how we can combat disease just by being selective on our plant varieties. That we can make sure that we're planting varieties that are resistant to diseases rather than plant varieties that are not and then have to get into chemical approaches or other control methods. And I thought that was a good message. You can stop the problem right at the very beginning by making sure that you're not even planting something that is susceptible to a certain disease. One interesting takeaway was this line: free water is probably the most important factor influencing pathogen infection. The result of infection may be plant disease. Free water is essentially water that has no other purpose at the time. The plant doesn't need it, and it's not running away. The soil is not taking it up. So it's water that is there and can play host to things that can eventually lead to disease in the plant. So we learned about how we can make sure that there isn't free water, how we can water at appropriate levels to make sure that the plant isn't overwatered or underwatered. And I didn't expect to hear this. I thought we were going to be told very specific amounts of water in very specific times. But I liked the message about how we want to water as deeply as we can, as infrequently as we can. And I thought that was good sound advice that anybody can put to use and that will help prevent plant diseases. We learned about how mulch plays a role in preventing plant disease, but also that if we don't care for our mulch, it can actually serve as a pathway for disease. So for example, if we notice a fungus growing on a leaf and we allow those leaves to die all the way back and fall down into our mulch, and we don't clean up that mulch, that all we're doing is providing a bed for that fungus to eventually shoot spores back out onto the plant, and that we need to care for the ground cover just as much as we're caring for the plant itself. While we learned about several different kinds of fungus and bacteria, one thing that I enjoyed learning about was how soil compaction can create a situation where there's not enough oxygen getting to the roots, and learning how to identify that. It's one thing for someone to bring you a cutting of a plant and be able to identify a particular virus or fungus or bacterial infection to a plant. It's another to be able to look at a picture and understand that it's a problem with something like oxygen not getting to the roots that's causing for the plant to not be able to develop properly. Here's a fun little takeaway tip for you. One thing we learned was that brassicas produce a fungicide when they decay. I had never heard that before. The tip we were given was if we grow mustard to 30% of flowering, so once 30% of the flowers have bloomed, and then if you cut them down and cover them over the soil, that it will produce enough fungicide to combat fungus growing in that area. Talk about a really good biological control where we're using nature to control nature and not having to get involved in chemicals. It was a great tip. Throughout this class, we learned about all sorts of different diseases and things that cause diseases. Everything from root knot nematodes to powdery mildew to peach brown rot and everything in between. How to identify the difference between fire blight and wilting and different kinds of galls that affect plants and the reasons for these infections. There were so many different things to cover that I certainly can't go over it here on a short YouTube video, but I was very impressed with how much information we went over and how we can identify the differences between a bacteria, a virus, or even just environmental conditions. Things from having too much wind in an area to excessive sunlight or too much water, too little water, and all the different things that can affect a plant that cause it stress that end up leading to disease. One thing that's been stressed to us throughout this course is the idea that as master gardeners, people come to you with examples and then they want an answer. So someone brings you a fruit that has damage to it and they say, what caused this damage? And you have nothing much more to go on. You can ask a few questions and try to get some answers, but they keep stressing about how, look, you're going to get a picture. Someone's going to take a picture with their cell phone. It's not going to be at the angle you wish it was at. It's not going to include as much of the site as you wish it would, and the client's still going to want an answer. And one funny little exercise they gave us was this damage that was done to a peach. And they said, can you identify what damage was done to this peach? And you can't tell anything. There's no leading edge of a fungus infection. You can't see any signs of bugs going in or out of it. And what it was hail damage. It came from a tree that had a late hail and ended up causing damage to the peach fruit. And without the knowledge of the climate in the area and the weather that came through, they wouldn't have been able to identify that damage. So I thought it was a really good learning lesson and a tool for us to walk away with. The rest of the class, now that we've talked about organic and cultural approaches to dealing with problems, started to talk about the proper use of fungicides and pesticides in dealing with these plant issues. And they talked about all sorts of different kinds of things. We talked about penetrants that are used for fungicides and protectants that are used for fungicides, how they are different, how to use them, and most importantly, the message that was repeated was to follow the label, follow the label, follow the label. So there you have it. That was pretty much plant diseases wrapped up. I enjoyed this because I got to learn and respect that there are a lot of different things that can cause a plant disease, and that sometimes what you first think is the problem may be a common problem, but it's not necessarily the problem happening to that plant, and that you really have to take into account everything that's taking place on a particular site to determine whether or not it was weather, whether it was the site, whether it's the nutrients in the soil, whether it's the presence of a fungus or an infectious bug, before deciding to make the determination. It was a good lesson in taking a step back and getting as many questions answered and evaluating a situation before making a determination. All for the importance that once the determination is made, then you can move forward. But you don't know how to move forward in dealing with a disease until you can properly identify it. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.